Welcome to this module that we've called Look Smarter on delivering your work in Excel. This is basically about one PowerShell module that I've collaborated on with a guy called Doug Fink. He's been working on it for a couple of years longer than I have, and I've been working on it for the last 3 years. If you are expecting anything else, if you're expecting a different module, if you came for the big 5 IP demo, and you couldn't find it, yes, that's a 404 joke there down the corridor. So, quick bit of background to me. I'm James O'Neill. I spent 10 years, I sometimes say I served 10 years at Microsoft and was then released. Sometimes I talk about it as being like a 10-year marriage to a beautiful psychopath. But I don't work there anymore. I've been out of there for several years, and I now describe myself as freelance because people seem to get a bit upset when I call it mercenary. My claim to fame when I was still at Microsoft, if any of you worked with Live Communication Server and had the resource kit, my first big PowerShell project was writing the support for Live Communication Server that went in the LCS 2008 resource kit. A colleague of mine, going way back in Microsoft, showed me some of the PowerShell they were doing, and I made some slightly disparaging noises in the way that you do when you've got all the experience of 3 or 4 months of PowerShell experience. And instead of saying, if you're so blooming clever, you do it then, he kind of played to my ego and said, hey, you seem to have a lot of skills in this, you could really help us. And the next thing I knew, I was writing that. And then I did some stuff around Hyper-V, and one of my colleagues said, oh, James is going to release this on Codeplex. And I went, am I? And I ended up writing the initial support for Hyper-V in PowerShell. And just as I was leaving Microsoft, the product group took over doing that job properly, but they used what I'd done as as the kind of template for that. Mentioned my work with Doug on this module. I've also got quite a large module. If you work with Teams, SharePoint, Exchange, OneNote, OneDrive, any of the stuff in Office 365 that uses the Microsoft Graph REST APIs, I've got a module called MSFT Graph, which does a load of stuff with that. Other contact information, the obligatory information at the bottom. So what is this import Excel thing? It's a wrapper for a library called EP+. EP+ is a single DLL, and it reads and writes the compressed XML, which makes up an XLSX file. You might know if you rename one of these files to .zip, you can open it up, you find a bunch of XML inside it. It's free to deploy, which is good because it means you don't need an Excel license where you want to run it. And it also means you can stick it on servers fairly easily. You would be surprised the number of places I've been where people have wanted to put Excel on servers and the fuss and bother that has followed as a result. It says on there it has approximately 200,000 downloads. Sometime this morning it went from 199,000 to 200,035. It's probably done a few more since I pulled that page up. Oh, it's done another 7 in that time. So it's had over 200,000 downloads. That's getting very close to what that Hyper-V module of mine had, and it will probably beat that in the next 6 weeks to 8 weeks. So that's quite gratifying for those of us who've been involved in it. Roughly half of those have been in the last 10 months or so. That was when we released the 5.0 version. We've done about 15 releases in the interim, so that's not 100,000 distinct users, that's 100,000 downloads. And we've just released version 6. The big thing about version 6 is I found a way to improve the speed of exporting. So things that were taking several minutes, we've improved by a factor of about 10. I have done a blog post on it, but the long and the short of this is that if you have a very small function and you call it squillions of times, the overhead of calling it can be much bigger than the time spent inside it. So we had a function that got called every time you put something into a cell. I took the code out of that, put it where the function was being called, and things went 10 times faster. It's a fairly simple improvement. We also did some stuff so that things don't need to be piped into it under all circumstances as well, which can speed things up if you're not passing things down the pipeline. It's compatible with PowerShell core. There's one little hiccup to do with auto sizing, which we'll actually see when I come to doing some demos. And the 6.0 version, that should say 6.0.1 fixes it. The 6.0 version has an issue where the manifest refers to files with case that doesn't actually match the name of the files, which is perfectly fine on a file system that doesn't discriminate on case. Not quite so good on one that does. However, just to prove a point, here I've got my Cloud Shell. I've just mapped a drive to my Cloud Shell. And over here we've got, would you believe it? Well, it's always fun when that happens, particularly as that's not the shell that I am looking for. I want, it gets even better. Okay, so I've got the Azure module installed, so I've just signed into Azure, and now I can tell what? Do that then. We are going to be having fun today, aren't we? Yeah, that's I own the domain miserablebugger.com. And this goes back to trying to register domains in the early 2000s, and I complained that people had already got every permutation possible of my first name, last name, and initials. And my wife said, well, why don't you register miserable-bugger then? Because everybody will know that it's you. Well, there you go. So, if I am now signed into Azure, which I am, I should be able to go, give me a Cloud Shell. And unfortunately, I didn't offer any appropriate sacrifices to the demo gods beforehand, so I do not have an enormous amount of faith that this is going to connect. But if it does, I will just show you that it does run in Cloud Shell. I'll give it about 15 or 20 seconds, and if it hasn't connected by then, I am going to pull the plug on it. Talk among yourselves. Yeah, Azure's signed in at the bottom, so what I should then be able to do is to start a... Oh, something is happening. Well, we'll come back to that, and if it's come to life, it will come to life. Otherwise, you'll just have to take it on trust that it does connect and run in a Cloud Shell. And if people don't believe me, I will try and demonstrate that separately afterwards. Okay, so that's a good start, isn't it? I have about 24 demos, and so far, 100% failure rate. Anybody got an early flight to catch? You could be out of here sooner than you thought. So the main commands in this module are those. That's the sort of mandatory eye chart. I'm a great believer that PowerShell commands should do one thing, should be dead simple, and shouldn't have a vast number of options. I have to tell you that when I show you the syntax for export. Doug, when he started doing this, got himself sort of down one of those rabbit holes that you can't easily reverse back out of. And that is, send your data to one command that will do everything you want with Excel. That was a brilliant idea. Can't fault him for that idea. The problem was that Excel can do so many things that things kept getting bolted on and bolted on and bolted on. And it kind of all makes sense. But you can see down the bottom here, we've got all sorts of things to do with pivot tables. So what do we want the totals to do in pivot tables? And somewhere else, there are other things to do with pivot tables, but don't ask me why the syntax has ended up with them sort of 3 lines from the top and the other one's down at the bottom here. It's ended up a bit too complicated, that one, but there we go. I just want to have a look and see if you can't see this, but if I do that, it's getting there. It might actually give me a cloud shell, but not anytime very soon. So, what were the goals of doing this module then? It's two or three things really. One is to say, I mean, the whole reason it was called import in the first place, and I'm talking primarily about exporting, but there you go. The primary reason was we wanted Excel format data to be a first-class citizen in PowerShell. How many times have we heard somebody this week say, oh, just import this from a CSV, import that from a CSV? When did anybody who's not an IT person give you a CSV file? Oh, I've got it in Excel. Okay, let me talk you through how you save a CSV. No, don't just send it to me, I'll convert it. Well, scrub that. And often this is not just data, this is instructions for things we want. So the first place I worked with this in I was going to say in anger, but that's probably the wrong word. But the first place I used this seriously was I was working for the Mercedes F1 team, and we had to build small environments of virtual machines. There were like half a dozen at a time, nothing particularly grand. But we kept building them and then being told, that's wrong, that's not what we asked for. Okay, we said, here is a spreadsheet. Fill in what you would like. We will read the spreadsheet. We will turn that into a piece of script that creates the virtual machines using the VMware PowerCLI stuff. And then we'll use a bit of DSC to set up the disks for you. And after that, we're handing it over and you're on your own with it. And what we got, there was then no argument about. Have we built the machine according to what this spreadsheet said? Yes. Good. Don't tell us we've built it wrong. No, look, you put it in the spreadsheet. Here's your spreadsheet. We have built it how you... So we had that. Sometimes it's easier to just manipulate stuff in a spreadsheet from PowerShell than it is to do it with Excel. There are times where actually doing that's just because you know PowerShell better than you know how to do it in Excel. But there are some things where you say, you know what, I want to just find things that are duplicates through some really complicated rule. And I don't want to do that by sorting in Excel and then doing remove duplicates and then doing something else. That's too hard. I can just do it really quickly by scanning down that file and using PowerShell to do it. And the main reason, I was looking for this quote this morning. There's a quote, and I remember it differently to the way I found it, but there's a guy who wrote a book called The Image in the 1960s, and he said something, I remember it as Shakespeare talked about those who were born great, those who achieved greatness, and those who had greatness thrust upon them. Everybody heard that quote at some point? He said, and Shakespeare forgot to mention those who hired PR agents to make themselves look great. Well, this is about making our work look good. Okay, I'm not making any bones about it. 10 years at Microsoft told me how good it was to present yourself well to management. If I'd heeded those lessons at the time, maybe I'd still be working for Microsoft, but there you go. That's another story entirely. So this is about producing what I call management readable format. Okay, it's putting that surface on the work that we do so that other people get it. Now, that's what gave rise to the really complicated stuff in export, And there are one or two things that we'd really like to be able to do, but we can't do with something that's just creating an XLSX file. Okay? Some things only happen once Excel loads the file up. The most commonly mentioned one is people would like to be able to filter on things before Excel has got a handle on what the data is that it's filtering. Unfortunately, you can't do that. The EP Plus module does do some calculations, but it doesn't do all the calculations that Excel can do. So it will actually look at what you put in cells, and it will try and do calculations, but it can't do everything that's there in Excel. So just on the, another old quote. I'd looked this one up as well. Some people say it's a Chinese proverb, and if it's a Chinese proverb, other people will tell you Confucius said it, and other people say that Benjamin Franklin said it, and various other people. However, my version is you tell people and they forget, you show them and they might remember, but if you give them a pie chart, well, you're in. So, and while I'm being frivolous, oh, by the way, my pie chart is about accurate for the level of my jokes. About 50% of them are dad-level jokes, and those are just puns. It's a genuine pie chart, but like all pie charts, it's not labelled with any numbers, so we can't attach much meaning to it. So, this is the mandatory thing that oh, just as a side thing, when I came through SeaTac Airport on the way here, there's another English person who I think was at this conference who was going through, getting his passport checked, and the guy checking my passport said, and what are you here for? And I said, I think I'm at the same conference as the guy who's just gone through. And he said, oh, death by PowerPoint. And I said, well, yeah, I'm actually killing them. I'm delivering the PowerPoints. He said, make sure you've got at least one pie chart in your slide deck. I don't know who that immigration official was, but whoever you are, sir, that was for you. Now, I will tell him I put it in if I recognise it. Every slide deck has to have one of these, but this is just this thing about send me a request as a spreadsheet, I'll do the work, I'll test it and prove that I've done it. This has become my hobby horse over the last 2 or 3 years, that how do you show that you've done the things that you were supposed to have done? Okay, if some of you came to the session I did last year, I'm sorry, no, a bit late now. I was talking about some stuff I was doing there with large-scale DSC, and we were sending things back, and we had 2 people doing build operations. I was automating builds, and other people were doing builds manually, and I was actually testing the builds that they'd done and finding that they hadn't done things consistently. And I said, well, what instructions did you follow when you built them? Got a blank look. What did you tick off to say that you'd done all the steps? Who actually did the steps? No trail at all. So I'll do the work, I'll test it, I'll send you the result back as a spreadsheet. You might get a chance to go round the loop again and send me another set of requests as a spreadsheet for the next phase. So that's the something as a S, so RAAS, and as a spreadsheet instead of as a service. And well, we all know about infrastructure as code. Well, I'm into infrastructure as spreadsheets. This is the kind of thing that I produce. I keep saying rude things about management, and the place where I'm working at the moment, one of the ladies who's in the chain of command said she'd watched one of my presentations from a previous session on YouTube. She didn't say which one, but I'm now worried what future employers might think when I say some of these things. I gave this to management and said, don't look at the data. What I want you to look at, this is a sort of a heat map for where things are wrong. So the columns are actually different servers. And down this side, useful Excel tip, by the way, is filtering by color. You'll notice, if you've got really, really good eyesight, that this is not a full list of numbers down the side. There are some missing, because it's filtered to just the red ones. The red ones are the aspects of configuration that aren't consistent. And then as we go across, Pink is missing, yellow is not what it should be, and orange is added or markedly different from. So you can see this is a heat map to tell us if everything's white on here, that's brilliant because everything's consistent. But this is showing the thing across the piece. And you notice across the bottom, this is general configuration, and there's a page for hotfixes and one for software and services and so on. Some of you I know have got really good eyesight, the rest of you haven't. This just tells you a little bit about the environment I was working in. That's the yellow bar across the bottom there. Some of those aren't users, by the way, some of them are groups. So, recent work on here, I've mentioned the performance boost. There's a function available to let you put tables straight into a sheet with EP+, so we now leverage that and do it a little bit better than the first pass of doing it. I've added diff and merge support. I've added some data validation support, which is going to be the last demo, and I've done some stuff on code quality. We have about 188 Pester tests. These get run several times before something gets released, and I shouldn't do this. In fact, I'm not going to do this, so ignore that. I'll come back to that at another point. So the clock is marching on. I have 24 demos, and I have 24 minutes to do them in. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And no, that's not a Cloud Shell. It's actually given up and it's closed the Cloud Shell. It's just abandoned. Right, so let's go to the top of here and actually see if we can get this all to work. So the first thing is I want to make sure I'm in my temp directory when I do this. So the very simplest thing we can do is just take something and send it to export Excel. And if I do that, oh, go on. There we go. That's not the one, that's the one. So here is everything that you get when you look at Get Network Adapter. Okay, so every property of those objects has just been exported. We haven't told Excel to export Excel to do anything different, so there they all are, bang, 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 and it goes, well, it keeps on going, doesn't it? There you are. So, yeah, well, these are actually SIM objects. You can see just on the end of there, these are SIM objects. In some of the versions of 6, you don't have Get Network Adapter, but you can still get these SIM objects. So that's an example. And if you can see the name at the top, it's just got a randomly assigned file name. I didn't give it a file name, and one of the things that we try to do is not let you send the data in and then get to the very end and go, oh, you didn't give me a file name. I'm just going to abandon at this point. We're always going to try and save it somewhere. So let's do the same thing again, but this time I'm going to tell it where I want it saved. And the difference, if I just export it here, it says, right, I'm going to apply some defaults to how the data is formatted, and I'm going to launch that in Excel. This time, you've given me the path, so you're a bit more in control. I'm not going to do any of those things, so you have to start that for yourself. And there's a much simpler version. And you can see this time it's got a number on it. It's not very nicely formatted. The previous version, you notice we've got filters here. Everything's auto-sized and so on. Here we've not got auto-size and we've not got the filters. But we can soon fix that, because if we say here, we want to, this time we're going to export it, still give the path. We want it to be shown, i.e. open it in Excel, auto-size it, auto-filter it, make the top row bold, don't scroll the top row off the top of the screen if we scroll it. So if we run that one, you can see this time we've got nice bold top row, and if I do go to the bottom, you can see I've still keep the titles on the top. I've got filtering, etc. Okay. So you will have noticed the complete absence of rocket science so far. So let's get a little bit smarter. One of the things, I shouldn't have closed that one. Let's just reopen. One of the things you notice here is that that media type, 802.3, is formatted as a number. Okay. Well, it's not really a number, it's really text. So I can say here, don't do number conversion on that media type column. So this time, I just want that to go out as text. Really useful when you're dealing with phone numbers, this one, because as you might know, Excel likes to look at your phone number and say, oh, that's a really long integer. Nope. Oops. Let's try and do that properly. So this time we've said it's not going to be a number, and you can see Excel's actually saying to us, well, look, this looks like a number to me, but you've stored it as text. No, I know what I'm doing, leave it alone. In fact, we can apply that across the piece there. So ignore that error. Right. So let's close that one and close that one as well, and just for completeness we'll close that one. I'm going to come back to this other one. Now, in fact I'm going to come back to it now. That sheet I showed you with a heat map on it, one of the things that it actually pulls in, these are names of servers across the bottom. This is a real live customer's server, and I think we're sufficiently out of date that I can show the name of a server at least. This is the result of running a Pester test. For the DSC that I did, I had a bit of script that kind of munged the MOF files that come out of DSC, and it produced some Pester that I could run. PowerShell is really good at crunching text. All high-level programming languages are lumps of text. Therefore, I can crunch a MOF file and I can output some text, which is actually a PowerShell script. So that runs a script, and it basically is a Pester test for checking each of those things. So these are the, this piece here is the context in Pester. So the bits that say a properly configured server, and the bits that say the build process did this, that's actually from the DSC things. So you can see we've removed PowerShell version 2, we've made sure PowerShell 5 is installed, etc. So that's what comes back from there. And the great thing with this is it's got conditional formatting in. I don't care about the successful ones, just tell me about the failures. So I can go filter by color, show me I've only got one failure. This server can't connect to its domain controller for those reasons. The reasons being that the domain controller in question is very old, and if you remove SMB1 from the machine trying to talk to it, you can't talk to the domain controller. Oops. Oh, I shouldn't have closed that either. That's going to mess something else up in a minute. So, to do a bit of very simple conditional formatting, I'm just going to say, let's define some conditional formatting here. One thing I do like about Visual Studio Code is that you don't have to select the whole line when you do F8. And so, compared with trying to do demos in the ISC, it's much easier. You just click on a line and press F8. So here's what's in that conditional formatting. So it's a contains text type of conditional formatting. Make it green. Make the text green if you can see the word up, and make the background white. Well, I think we can follow that. So let's do get network adapter, and we'll tell it to apply this conditional format. Now, my machine was playing up earlier, and every now and then Excel opens and doesn't open the sheet. So I'm just going to cheat and just go start net 4. That's the one it's just opened. Now, I don't know if it's actually clearer on the screen than it is on mine. Those have come up in green, and again, I can do that filter by color and just say, show me the ones that are up. I'd probably do this the other way around in real life, but that's quite a useful trick for highlighting things. and really useful for all sorts of, this is just wrong, okay? This server is missing this patch, this server has got this feature installed, this, whatever it happens to be. Just a little bit more on conditional formatting. I've got this little library that I wrote called getSQL, and getSQL is just a wrapper for calling stuff into ODBC. So I've just said, make a connection and call the session F1, and it defines an alias F1, so I can go F1 minus table, and if I start tabbing, you can see it just goes and gets the name of the tables from the database. So I can say, get me drivers where, and I can start tabbing in the name of the driver. So it's just makes stuff really easy, and it means I don't have to write loads of wrappers. I happen to be cheating here because this database is actually in Excel. 30,000 rows of every Formula One result in every race ever. Yes, you can see why I got a job with the Formula One team, can't you? So, if I get that data, okay, I want to throw away some of the extra stuff that's part of a data row, and I'm actually going to apply some extra filtering to it. It's really bad SQL behavior, but bear with me. So filter out the drivers who've had fewer than 5 wins, export that to Excel, okay, and just leave it be for a moment. So that's gone to Excel, and then I'm going to say reopen the file you just closed, and I want you to add conditional formatting to that. I want you to use the wins column. So here I've said make every column its own named range. So we've got wins and driver name. So what I'm saying here is use the wins column and use the flags for conditional format on that. So I can do that, and then I can say close the file, open it in Excel. So here we go. Why do I think that's, oh no, that looks okay. Now there's something wrong with this, and that is that if you look at the number of red, yellow and green flags, they don't look terribly evenly distributed. Okay, if I just do a quick data filter, and we'll filter it by the number of wins. So we'll go largest to smallest. The 2 highest drivers at the top of there, they've got green flags, the next 3 have got yellow, and all the remainder have got red flags, because we've done who's got more than 2/3 of the highest number, who's got between 1/3 and 2/3, and who's got less than 1/3. Well, that's pretty rubbish, actually. So what I'll do instead, let's close that file. So I'm just going to delete that one, and I'm going to do it again. Okay, but this time I've done 2 things. One is I've said run export Excel with a pass-through switch. So now I haven't closed the file, and I've got an object that represents that OpenXLSX file in $Excel. I'm going to create conditional formatting, and again I'm going to say do it with pass-through. So if I use pass-through, now I've got $CF. I didn't know. I've managed to highlight a whole mixture of stuff there. Let's try to do that properly. So that's what the conditional formatting looks like, and those 3 icons are the 3 different flags. So if I look at icon 2, it says, okay, that goes from 33%. Well, I don't want 33%, I want the 33rd percentile. So we'll make those percentiles instead, close Excel, or close the file, open it in Excel, and now you can see, and I've pre-sorted this to make it just easier to view, but here you've got the first third are green flags, the next third are yellow flags, and the last third, surprise, surprise, are red flags. So we can take hold of some of these configuration bits inside Excel and manipulate them over and above what we can do just by calling export Excel. Okay. and make sure I don't leave the file open because that tends to upset things. So let's try a slightly bigger database. Any photographers in the room? Only one? Let me try that again. Any photographers in the room? Only a couple. So if you use Adobe Lightroom, underpinning Adobe Lightroom, there is a SQLite database. You can get an ODBC driver for SQLite. And so that same thing that I was using before, I can say, define me a SQL query. Ta-da, there's a SQL query. Use getSQL, so I'm going to tell getSQL, just set up, whoa, no, we're not. Tell getSQL to connect to a pre-existing ODBC source called LR for Lightroom. And I love this. I don't know how many people know, when PowerShell is confronted with a command it doesn't recognize, the last thing it does before it gives up is it says, is there a get command that would be get this? So SQL is an alias for getSQL. I don't have to do anything to define it. It takes the parameter SQL, which I've stored in a variable called SQL. So my command here is SQL, SQL, SQL. Developer, developer, developer. So let's actually go and get that load of data. You can just see at the bottom there's a little right host. It should be a right host here because it's just decoration, it's not output, telling me that about 4,800 rows came back. There's 800 columns, 800 columns? 18 columns in there. That makes this about 86,000 cells. So let's see how long it takes to export that. This is where the performance improvement came from. And this is where I go, oh, I put my computer on battery saver, didn't I? So it's not, well, there it is. There we go. All 86,000 cells. So you've got all the various bits and pieces. Now, this hasn't done any formatting. It hasn't tried to do anything clever. This is literally just piped those database records in. So when I actually scroll across here, you can see one of the things that I mentioned before was we try and resolve numbers that look like, or text that looks like numbers to be a number. We don't do this with dates. Who in here doesn't come from the United States? So you have the same view as I do about least significant in the middle date formatting. Yeah? Japanese have logical date formatting. They have least significant at the end. In Europe and most other places, we have little endian, so we put least significant at the beginning. Only in America.
Land is free.
Yeah, although a fair few of them should be locked up. And I recognise the voice, Jeffrey. No, I'm not going to tell you the heckler joke because I'm being recorded. But yes, we don't try and process dates. The reason for doing this is actually really, really simple. You're going to get it wrong at least 50% of the time. If I run something in Europe and I say, assume that you're in Europe, therefore the date that you're getting as text is in European format, there's a 50-50 chance that actually I've been handed it in US format, right? I cannot safely apply local date format, so I don't try. I just say, you sort out the dates. If you give me a date, I'll put it into Excel as a date. If you give me a string that contains a date, it's staying as a string. This does throw people from time to time. You can see, because I just piped data rows in, there are some fields on the end here that are just sort of artifacts of being a data row. I'm not going to let those worry me too much. What I am going to let worry me is just how slowly I'm actually getting through the content here. So what I am going to do here is just speed this up and show you that I can take that same data, and this time I'm going to specify a pivot chart and a pivot table, and so I will take that same data with a definition of a pivot chart and a pivot table and use this send SQL data to Excel. So this all now happens in one atomic action. So the bit that just scrolled up the screen was the definition of the chart and the table. And the bit that you couldn't actually see run because it happened so quickly was going and fetching the rows and sending it to this picture demo.xls. So, okay, I didn't, sorry?
You didn't run the top block, did you, from 93?
93, 94, 95.
No, I've skipped that, but that should be okay. Oh, because it's still in Excel, that's why. The other thing that I can do here, yes, so I'll do that again. That's how long it takes to send all that data into Excel. And I've got this little command here, how long, because every time you want to run measure command, you've run the command already. So this just looks at the history and says how long did the previous command take, or I can give it a number and get a particular command from the history. If I go and get the sheet object for sheet 1, you can see that it's currently 13 columns wide, and I can refer to cells with either kind of notation, so I can specify row and column, or I can specify A1, B2, etc. So you can see here, if I say 1, 2, it's row 1, column 2. So a quick trick to find some data and actually apply some formatting to it, I can just whiz across the top of that sheet. So I can do 1 to the number of columns. If row 1 for that column is either aperture value or shutter speed value, then I've got this command, set XL column, and if I pipe a number into it, it'll set the number format on that column to whatever I give it. So let's just do that. And I can add a couple of extra columns as well, because the camera parameters that are stored are not actually stored in the normal format. So that's basically saying create some new columns with headings, and they've got formulas in them, and stick them on the end. So now that sheet has become wider. It was 13 and it's now 15 wide. Oh, I should have auto-fitted it, so I can do auto-fit. Again, that's just a property of a range, and I can make it look nice by saying make it an Excel table. And if I call, instead of calling close Excel package, if I call export Excel, I can give it some extra commands. So you can see here I've got a nice little pivot table that shows my what lenses I've used with which camera, and over here I've got my data. So these columns are now rounded to 2 decimal places. These are actually showing the things you'd expect from the camera settings, and it's all formatted as a beautiful table. So that's kind of working with those. Now, Doug, when we were talking about code quality, Doug actually sent me something this morning, and I'm just going to show this very, very quickly. He gave me this little script that basically works out a file name, and then it runs the script analyzer. Anybody using script analyzer? Wouldn't it be great if you could show your teams how their code looked? So this is going to say summarize it, and then here are some parameters for export Excel, nicely splatted rather than all on one long command line, and then we're going to basically export that data with those parameters. So if I cd into the old version of the module and run that, it takes a few seconds to run, and I am getting paranoid about the time. We are supposed to finish at 1:45, aren't we? So I'm going to overrun. So this will call up a pivot table with a chart in it that shows me how many errors of which type I had in the previous version. This might not be as good an idea as I thought it was going to be. Here we go. So here's the previous version. You can see we've got a total of 572 errors found by the analyzer, but actually 517 of them are white space in the wrong place. So we could say, just give me the warnings, but we've still got 54 warnings. If I go and run that for the current version, so change directory to my GitHub directory and run it against there. The second time it's supposed to run a lot faster, but with the way my luck is going today, I don't think it's going to. I think it will probably take just as long, but it's worth doing the comparison because it's also used for something else. I'm going to skip this next piece. No, I'm not. I'm going to do this next piece, damn it. So that's how it looks now. We've got 4 errors because we've got a couple of things where we just haven't seen how to put them right. But how about this for something to have in a team meeting when you've got the devs there? Let's have a look and say, this is where we used to be and this is where we are. Come on, close that. This is where we used to be and this is where we are now. Anybody want to tell me where they'd rather be? That's the sum total of our problems now. You look at how we had to scale them before just to get them to fit in. So that's those. All the stuff I've exported so far has been sort of complicated compound objects. You can just export a simple list and come on. Why does that one not want to close? No. So I've got here some text. There is a website called Cupcake Ipsum. I think everybody knows the normal lorem ipsum text. Well, lorem ipsum is a bit boring, so I've got Cupcake Ipsum instead. So I'm just going to take the random text that came out of Cupcake Ipsum, and I'm going to take, there's roughly 20 lumps of text in there, and what I've said here is each of those is just going to be a one-word string. So send a whole bunch of one-word strings to export Excel and start the export at a different column each time. So basically I've done 20 separate exports to 20 separate columns, and if I start that, you can see there it is. Yeah, Cupcake Ipsum. When I used to spend lots of time doing word clouds, I just used it to produce things like that. So there it is on a much smaller scale. Now, I've deliberately produced this because this is really difficult to read. Okay, you can't really see the modifications that I've just done. And I've now got 2 versions of that cupcake data, which are subtly different. And I would defy anybody to find those differences. Well, of course, I'm not going to show you a problem if I haven't got a solution, am I? So I'm going to skip over all of that and just show you the compare function that's now in here. And what the compare does is it does a diff on spreadsheets. How useful is that? Okay. So there you go, and again, that filter and filter by colour, the one cell that's changed, can you see that, that green line at 18? You see one's got gingerbread filled down and one's got tiramisu nicely picked out in red. Quite useful, I thought. I was quite pleased with that. And then I thought, well, you know what, if I can do diffs, how about a merge? So those 2 spreadsheets, those 2 sheets that, those 2 sheets that I did with the errors in them, wouldn't it be nice if we could just bring those together in a single sheet? Oh look, there they are. So highlighted in green are the additions that are in the second one. The white ones are the same in both, and the orange one is different between the two of them. So the same logic that I had in that other sheet. And again, red to say there's something different on this row. And that then led to doing one other thing. So the one other thing I'm going to show you, and the piece I haven't got time to, I'm going to drop one piece, is those network spreadsheets that I was doing earlier on. I've got merge multiple sheets here. So let's actually merge those together. And have I left one of those open? What a shame. That's going to... Oh, hang on. There we go. So what I'm going to do is take all those together, bring them into a single sheet, and of course it's back at its old tricks again. Hang on. So now I've got pink for something that's gone missing. So this one only exists in one particular network or one particular machine. That machine's missing those two. These are different. You can see the network status there has gone from enabled or disabled to berserk. And actually you find that between the hotel and the conference center we get different network speeds. So you can see that there's different network speeds in there as well. So I can merge all that together and build one of those heat maps. And it was as simple to build that as you just saw, and that was the one that I showed you. So I am now grossly overrunning, so I'm going to cut the last bit of the demo. There was one other piece I was going to show you, but it's far too long given that I've grossly overrun already. So what have I passed on? Hopefully some Excel tips. I don't know how many of you had thought about using filter by color before, but it's really useful. That thing of using ranges and then referring to the range later on. So you just do auto name range and then you can refer to it in things as you get a bit further down the script. Two really useful tricks. Performance, a couple of quick things. Obviously, get rid of the stuff before you send it to export Excel because it speeds things up. And if you've already got the object, use input object and the variable rather than piping the variable in. That saves sending things down the pipeline and shaves some time off. And some scripting tips. Lots of splatting in use this week, I noticed. You saw an example of it there. And using the definitions for tables and pivot tables, for charts, for conditional formatting, all that stuff avoids the monster command lines. There's lots of stuff exposed by EP Plus that we don't actually kind of surface through the module, and you can just explore and get to that stuff. So I would encourage you to explore. That is it. That's it for the sessions, for this session, for the conference, for this year. Thank you all.